Hi, this is Jeff Shapiro, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the May 12th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. What middle powers fear about the Trump-Xi summit? Asian nations worry that the president might trade security commitments for better economic terms with China during his planned meeting with Xi Jinping this week. Poland will soon host production lines for South Korean tanks. Australia is buying warships from Japan. Canada will send uranium to India, while India offers cruise missiles to Vietnam. And Brazil builds military transport planes for the United Arab Emirates. All of these deals were sealed in the past few weeks. Each one represents an attempt by middle powers to protect themselves as the conflict in Iran throttles global energy supplies and as a high-stakes summit between President Trump and Xi Jinping of China looms. Global polls show that the world has little trust in the United States and China. Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi have both used their enormous leverage over trade and security to coerce or punish. And in response, smaller nations are behaving as if they are stuck in Godzilla or Dune, moving quietly in small groups, trying not to provoke the wrath of petulant giants. It's 50 shades of hedging, says Richard Heidarian, a Filipino political scientist at Oxford University, or, as Jia-Yin Chong, a security analyst in Singapore, put it, no party wants to cross Beijing, and now Washington too. For countries watching from afar, dread and hope hover over the Trump-Xi meeting in Beijing, which is scheduled for this week. In Asia, which has been hit hardest and fastest by oil shortages caused by the war and China's tight control of oil product exports, the mood is particularly grim. Interviews with officials and statements from leaders traveling the globe to secure trade and defense deals suggest that most middle powers feel overwhelmed by the deteriorating world order. Many believe that the summit carries more potential for harm than for help, and Mr. Trump's gut-driven approach to complex issues is the main source of anxiety. For months, officials in Asia have worried that the president might be too eager to make a deal with Mr. Xi, ending weapons sales to Taiwan or agreeing to soften policy language that could make it easier for China to undermine the democratic island. That would be the biggest nightmare, said one Taiwanese official who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal government matters. He insisted that reduced support from the U.S. was unlikely. But any concession on Taiwan could lead other American partners to fear abandonment. Beijing's push for compliance on contested territory elsewhere would be bolstered, from the border with India to the South China Sea. Vietnamese officials said that if President Trump makes a conciliatory gesture or flatters Xi, even without bigger compromises, China will gain leeway to press harder on smaller countries. Another concern being discussed across the region that Mr. Trump might alter long-term security plans in exchange for better economic terms with China. Mr. Trump's decision to redirect a carrier strike group from the Pacific and munitions from South Korea for the war in Iran may have created momentum for broader redeployments. When the Pentagon announced that it would pull at least 5,000 troops from Germany after Mr. Trump expressed annoyance with the German chancellor, allies in Asia were again reminded how quickly collective deterrence could be weakened. Mr. Trump has threatened in the past to make troop withdrawals from Japan, which hosts around 53,000 American military personnel, more than any other country, and South Korea, where another 24,000 Americans are stationed. If he could get something big from Mr. Xi for a drawdown, would he turn down the deal? Analysts noted that plans opposed by China, such as the AUKUS, a pact between Australia, England, and the United States, designed to counter Beijing's influence by equipping Australia with nuclear-powered submarines and advanced technology, could also be suddenly canceled. The sense that U.S. allies have to look to one another because they can no longer look to America is very real, said Hugh White, a former Australian intelligence official who teaches strategic studies at the Australian National University. That sentiment is much stronger than the cautious public language of national leaders might suggest, he added. European and Asian officials often talk privately in frank terms about giving up their faith in America, prompting a no-turning-back effort to diversify away from the United States. In casual discussions with reporters, they can sound a lot like Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada, who received a standing ovation in Davos this year for a speech that declared, "We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition." But in public, they're more circumspect. Some officials admit their countries are trying to buy time and evade Mr. Trump's fits of pique while continuing the performance of imperial fealty. South Korean officials have simply expressed resignation over American military diversions, after making clear that they felt betrayed in 2004 when President George W. Bush announced plans to move troops from Asia to the war in Iraq. Australia, Taiwan, and Japan publicly repeatedly stressed the value of American leadership without caveats, even as U.S. tariffs and the war Mr. Trump started with Iran kneecapped their economies. No one wants to be seen stepping out of line. Japan's new minister, Sanae Takachi, has been bolder than most in trying to foster stronger relationships with other countries. Yet even as she crisscrossed the region promoting military cooperation, officials in Tokyo worried about how Washington would view her efforts. The Japanese won't take Takachi's security cooperation and tour, especially to Australia, to be seen as a version of Mark Carney, said Michael J. Green, the author of several books on Japan and chief executive of the United States Study Center at the University of Sydney. Others have apparently reached the same conclusion. Mr. Carney's recent visits to India and Australia did not yield strong statements from their leaders, echoing his criticism of great power rivalry or his warning that if middle powers are not at the table, we're on the menu. At the same time, many countries, including some that are benefiting from the thickening of middle power bonds, have been careful not to anger the world's largest hegemon, China. Nations managing their own disputes with Beijing, such as Indonesia, have done less to rally around Japan than some in Tokyo would have liked, since Ms. Takachi became embroiled in a diplomatic crisis after telling her parliament that if China attacked Taiwan, Japan could respond militarily. Vietnamese officials have pressed Ms. Takachi to avoid directly criticizing China in her speech at a university on May 2nd in Hanoi, according to diplomats who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe sensitive discussions. It is not clear if adjustments were made. Chinese officials later condemned her diplomatic efforts as war preparation. And yet, in a sign of how middle powers are still doing more while saying less, the two countries signed 6 cooperation agreements, including one on satellite data sharing and another to secure deliveries for Vietnam's largest oil refinery, potentially easing shortages. The U.S. has become more unreliable, so it makes sense to try to develop alternatives, said Robert O. Keohane, an international relations professor at Princeton University. Even if what's been formed so far is inefficient, he added, having a weak alternative is better than having no alternative at all. How China's leader lost faith in his generals. Xi Jinping spent 13 years building a military to rival that of the United States. But the stronger the Chinese forces grew, the less he trusted the generals he had handpicked to run them. The purge China's leader, Xi Jinping, has inflicted on the military elite was plain to see at a recent legislative meeting. A year earlier, state television footage showed around 40 generals in the room. This time, there were only a handful. Yet Mr. Xi indicated that an upheaval that rivaled those of the Mao era was not over. Stony-faced, he warned the remaining officers to beware of disloyalty. The military, he said, must never have anyone who harbors a divided heart toward the party. It was a rare public reference by Mr. Xi to one of the worst political crises of his 13 years in power. He had lost faith in the military leadership that he had spent a decade remolding. When Xi uses the words divided heart, they are heavy with meaning, said Chen Wen-Kao, a professor at National Chengchi University in Taiwan. The phrase is found in ancient Chinese treatises that counsel rulers against treacherous generals, including a volume Mr. Xi has kept on his bookshelf. Even his most trusted and important confidants have fallen, Professor Kao said. Who else can gain his trust? The crisis threatens one of Mr. Xi's great feats, the transformation of the Chinese military into a formidable force with new aircraft carriers, hypersonic missiles, and an expanding nuclear arsenal. And it comes when China's rivalry with the United States has intensified, and as the Trump administration has put American firepower and its limits on vivid display in Venezuela and Iran. China's war readiness may be disrupted for years by the very cleanup that Mr. Xi has said is necessary to purify and strengthen the ranks. Once looked like a limited crackdown on corruption became a sweeping dismissal of dozens of top officers and culminated in the downfall early this year of Chiang Kai-shek, China's top uniformed commander, who had appeared to be a confidant of Mr. Xi's. The final break between them came, by some accounts, when Mr. Xi sought to promote the general leading the cleanup to a position rivaling General Chang's. General Chang objected, and months later, he was out. The gravity of the campaign was on stark display again this past week when a military court sentenced two former defense ministers to death. Suspended for 2 years for bribery, they will probably spend the rest of their lives in prison. This is Xi Jinping's military, said Daniel Mattingly, an associate professor at Yale University who studies China's politics and military. Why does he break the thing that he built? It's not what people would have expected of Xi even 5 years ago. Something profound has changed, he said. The corruption Mr. Xi has been hunting is real, but earlier internal speeches by Mr. Xi, not previously reported in detail, reveal another factor: a leader who saw in any sign of disobedience the seed of a political threat to his rule. He became convinced, analysts say, that the commanders he had chosen to modernize the military could no longer be trusted, their loyalty and effectiveness eroded by graft and cronyism. Analysts say that the upheaval has also exposed the tensions between Mr. Xi's two imperatives: preparing for combat and enforcing loyalty. Ultimately, Mr. Xi ousted a battle-experienced general who helped remake his military and replaced him with an inquisitor who is now, alongside Mr. Xi, the sole other remaining member of China's top military council. Xi Jinping's rule is slowly entering its late stage, Professor Kao said. His political calculations change in this stage. His anxieties become increasingly about members of his own inner circle. Early on, Mr. Xi appeared determined to avoid the fate of his predecessor, Hu Jintao, who was widely seen to have failed to establish his authority over China's military commanders. Mr. Hu's weakness was exposed in 2011 during a visit to Beijing by Robert Gates, then the U.S. Secretary of Defense. Mr. Gates asked Mr. Hu about the test flight of a Chinese stealth fighter jet, news of which had emerged that morning on Chinese websites. Mr. Hu seemed to have no knowledge of it. The civilian leadership seemed surprised by the test, Mr. Gates told reporters later. So Mr. Hu's directives to Army commanders were more like suggestions than they would consider, said John Culver, a former CIA analyst, now at the Brookings Institution. Basically, you had a system that was no longer responsive to the party. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. After coming to power in 2012, Mr. Xi launched investigations against commanders who had grown wealthy and overweening under Mr. Hu. including some previously deemed untouchable because of their status. In 2014, Mr. Xi summoned hundreds of senior officers to Guotian, a town in eastern China where, according to party histories, Mao Zedong in 1929 established the fundamental principle that defines the Chinese state today. The party commands the gun. Mr. Xi used that historical backdrop to warn that the Communist Party's control of the armed forces had eroded to a dangerous degree. At Guotian, Mr. Xi laid out the problems that he had inherited. Faith in the party's values had decayed. Corruption, cronyism, and insubordination was brazen. He cited training exercises so fake that soldiers used shovels and sticks instead of guns. To Mr. Xi, the rot was exemplified by General Chu Kaihao, who was a retired vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, a position that had put him near the top of the People's Liberation Army. General Chu had been placed under investigation, accused of taking huge bribes, including for arranging promotions for officers. Chu Kaihao always solemnly professed undying loyalty and love toward the party, Mr. Xi said, according to a previously unreported version of a speech that he made in Guotian that circulated inside the military. But really, deep in his soul, he had long ago fallen away from the party and into corruption and depravity. Mr. Xi was also alarmed by events abroad. He cited cautionary stories of leaders in the Middle East and the Soviet Union who were toppled after their militaries abandoned them in the face of insurrections. Mr. Xi came to the job with reverence for the People's Liberation Army. His father was a revolutionary leader who had fought under Mao. In his early career, Mr. Xi worked as a secretary to the Minister of Defense. Mr. Xi believed that to instill loyalty in the military to the Communist Party and to him, he had to revive political work, the indoctrination, the vetting, and monitoring that made officers and troops trustworthy. To drive home the new spirit of discipline that he demanded in Guotian, Mr. Xi was shown eating coarse rice and pumpkin soup, the humble, storied meal of the early Red Army. Absolute loyalty to the party rests on the word absolute, Mr. Xi said. It is loyalty to the singular, total, unconditional, and free from any impurities or fakery. From his first years in power, Mr. Xi also began entrenching a chairman responsibility system, an overhaul that tightened his control over the military by giving him intelligence and control deep into its ranks. He declared his confidence in his own ability to spot the right commanders for promotion. The key to building a strong military lies in picking the right people, he said in an internal speech in 2016, describing how he vetted and spoke to prospects for promotion. Senior and middle-ranking officers are the backbone for building and running the military, and as chairman of the Central Military Commission, I should personally handle this. He also replaced decades-old military regions with new theater commands, and he dissolved Central People's Liberation Army departments that he saw as barriers to effective control. His goal was to give China the ability to combine land, air, and sea forces to project power abroad, while ensuring that this modernized force stayed unflinchingly loyal. General Cheng Xiaohao was among the commanders that were entrusted with executing Mr. Xi's vision. General Cheng was a gruff, charismatic officer who had distinguished himself on the front line of China's years-long border war with Vietnam from 1979. He was the son of a revolutionary general who had fought alongside Mr. Xi's father. Mr. Xi had early promoted him to the Central Military Commission and made him head of the military's General Armaments Department. The department was in charge of acquiring new weapons, which are vital to Mr. Xi's modernization plans, but had also become a mire of corruption, fed by its control over funds and contracts. He came from a privileged Communist Party background, and it showed, said Drew Thompson, who was working at the Pentagon and met General Cheng in 2012 when he took part in a Chinese military delegation on a visit to the United States. I think that combination of his background, his combat experience, his self-confidence, his comfort with weapon systems, and his openness to change made him attractive to Xi. By 2018, Mr. Xi appeared satisfied that his overhaul was paying off. While he acknowledged to the Central Military Commission that problems remained, he said that the changes were a historic transformation and that had saved the military. When Mr. Xi won a third term as leader in 2022, he unexpectedly retained General Chang in the military commission. At 72 years old, the commander had been expected to step down. Mr. Xi instead made him China's top general, tasked with pursuing Mr. Xi's goal of a breakthrough in military capabilities by 2027. China faced an increasingly perilous world, Mr. Xi said 2 weeks later during a visit to the Joint Operations Command Center. Direct all our energies to combat readiness, he said. But just over half a year later, in 2023, the veneer of stability cracked. Mr. Xi abruptly replaced the Rocket Force's top commander and his deputy, an extraordinary move in the arm of the military that controls nuclear and conventional missiles. The purge was never publicly explained. Then China's defense minister was dismissed without explanation. Suddenly, Mr. Xi's transformation of the People's Liberation Army looked plagued by the same problems of corruption and disobedience that he claimed to have excised. This time, Mr. Xi brought his commander to Tiananmen, the hallowed base of Mao's revolution, where Mr. Xi called for a deepening campaign of political rectification. In the 2 years that followed, dozens of high-ranking officers were removed or disappeared from public view. As the campaign widened, so did the power of General Chang Cheng-min, the commander steering the investigations. He had risen through the ranks despite having little experience in military operations. In the Rocket Force, he was a political commissar, enforcing party loyalty. He was known for his love of Chinese brush calligraphy. He was later promoted to a newly created agency that investigates graft and disloyalty in the military. His ascent reflected the importance Mr. Xi gave to ideological control and political loyalty, even as he also called for battlefield readiness. In Xi's analysis, failures of readiness stemming from corruption are merely an outgrowth of ideological impurity, said Joel Wufnow, a senior fellow at the National Defense University in Washington, who studies China's military. The rot was perhaps deeper than Xi imagined in 2023, and so he needed to take more drastic steps. General Chang Cheng-min's powers were most likely enhanced by pervasive surveillance technologies that gave investigators more tools to spy into the lives and financial flows of officers and their families, said Mr. Culver, the researcher at Brookings. By late 2025, the purges were reshaping not just the ranks, but the balance of power among remaining commanders. Analysts suggested that as the investigations deepened, there was growing turbulence inside the military elite, including between commanders focused on warfighting goals and officers tasked with enforcing political loyalty. Xi is trapped in a red versus expert contradiction, said Mr. Thompson, the former Pentagon official, referring to red as loyalty to the party. With China's next leadership transition due at a Communist Party Congress late next year, in this reading, Mr. Xi appeared more sensitive to perceived threats to his authority. His top commander, General Chang Chue, seemed more dominant, with many potential rivals toppled, but he was not untouched. The investigations had also brought down other generals linked to him, potentially implicating him, and the chief investigator, General Chang Cheng-min, was also rising. The final straw came when Mr. Xi moved to promote General Chang Cheng-min to vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, said Christopher K. Johnson, a former U.S. government intelligence officer who is now president of China's Strategics Group, a consultancy firm. General Chang Chao, backed by his second-in-command, General Liu Zhenlai, objected to that proposal because placing an investigator in such a powerful position risked painting the People's Liberation Army as an unserious combat force, Mr. Johnson said. Modern Chinese history offers examples of commanders who overestimated how far that they could actually push their leaders. General Chang appears to have done the same. Chang Chela thought, I've got the credentials to say this, and it turns out he didn't, Mr. Johnson said. When he and his deputy were removed early this year, the official military newspaper accused them of having gravely trampled on the chairman's responsibility system, which Mr. Chi had built up to cement his control over the military. Mr. Chi is not stopping there. In April, he launched the program of ideological rectification and revolutionary forging within the military, an indoctrination drive, in other words. Mr. Chi addressed the assembled senior officers, described as the first batch of attendees in Beijing, suggesting that the campaign to instill loyalty would continue to roll on. Television footage of the meeting showed rows of officers diligently taking notes as Mr. Chi spoke. Sitting next to him was General Chang Cheng-min, the enforcer. Reflecting pool repairs to cost $13.1 million. Trump had promised only $1.8 million. The Interior Department added $6.2 million to the no-bid contract for repairs to the Lincoln Memorial Pool late last week. President Trump said that his hand-picked contractor would charge only $1.8 million to repair the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool and paint it blue. The actual cost is now more than 7 times that, after the Interior Department nearly doubled the size of the contract late last week, federal records show. On Friday, the Interior Department added $6.2 million to the contract's previous cost, saying it now planned to pay $13.1 million to a Virginia firm called Atlantic Industrial Coatings. President Trump said that he chose that company to repair the landmark because the firm had worked on the swimming pools at his golf club in Sterling, Virginia. The government awarded that firm a no-bid contract last month, bypassing the requirement to seek competing offers by saying that the situation was so urgent that any delay would cause serious injury to the government. The government has not publicly said what that injury would have been. Instead, it has cited Mr. Trump's desire to get the work done before the country's 250th birthday on July 4th. Public contracting records do not say why the contract's cost increased so sharply on Friday. Katie Martin, a spokeswoman for the Interior Department, said that the higher price reflects the effort necessary to expedite the timeline of completing the leak prevention coating project. More people, more materials, more equipment, and longer hours ahead of our 250th. Atlantic Industrial Coatings did not respond to questions about the increase. But government documents obtained by the New York Times show that the contract's current value matches, down to the dollar, an offer submitted to the government by Atlantic Industrial Coatings in the middle of last month. That offer included a 20% profit margin, the documents show. Competitive bidding laws aim to ensure that the government is getting a fair price from its vendors. The contractor was hired to repair leaking joints between the pool's concrete slabs, waterproof the pool's bottom, and painted a shade called American Flag Blue. The pool has also been troubled for decades by leaks and algae blooms that turn its water green. On Monday, a nonprofit dedicated to landscape architecture filed a lawsuit in U.S. District Court in Washington seeking to halt the paint job. The Cultural Landscape Foundation said that the Trump administration had ignored a law requiring advanced scrutiny of projects that alter historic landmarks. The foundation, based in Washington, said in its lawsuit that every day that the resurfacing continues, the historic character of the reflecting pool is being further and fundamentally altered. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Times investigation: how Israel turned Eurovision stage into a soft power tool. Israel's efforts to influence Eurovision's vote were broader and started years earlier than previously known. Last fall and winter, senior Israeli diplomats urgently contacted officials and television broadcasters across Europe to address a delicate, if unexpected, topic: the High Camp Eurovision Song Contest. Broadcasters wanted to ban Israel from Eurovision and threatened to boycott the contest over the war in Gaza. Some even accused the Israeli government of unfairly influencing the results through a mass voting campaign. Israel arguably had bigger diplomatic concerns than a pop music competition, even one that reaches 166 million viewers around the world. A United Nations commission had recently accused Israel of committing genocide, which it vigorously denied. And world leaders were recognizing Palestinian statehood, which it had long opposed. I'm a little bit surprised why this is a matter that the embassy is looking into. Stefan Eriksson, the head of Iceland's national broadcaster, wrote to an Israeli diplomat who wanted to discuss Eurovision last December. This previously undisclosed diplomatic push to keep Israel in Eurovision was just one aspect of a drama that unfolded over the past year around the world's most watched cultural event. To the Israeli government, Eurovision became more than just a celebration of glittery outfits, gay pride, and pyrotechnic staging. It became a chance, through strong showings by its singers, to burnish the country's flagging reputation and rally international support. This year's competition starts on Tuesday, following the biggest crisis in Eurovision's 70-year history. Iceland and 4 other countries are boycotting to protest Israel's participation. The nonprofit European Broadcasting Union, which runs the contest, faces financial challenges. A New York Times investigation found a well-organized campaign by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government that embraced Eurovision as a soft power tool, and a secretive contest organizer that was ill-equipped to respond. As the normally lighthearted contest became a proxy fight over Middle Eastern affairs and human rights, Eurovision struggled to defend a core tenet: politics play no role in the event. Israel's efforts to influence Eurovision's vote were broader and started years earlier than previously known. Even before the voting controversy burst into view, financial records show that Israel spent at least $1 million on Eurovision marketing. Some of that money came from Mr. Netanyahu's Hasbara office, a euphemism for overseas propaganda to promote Israel's singer. Governments are not supposed to intervene in the voting. Eurovision is a contest for public broadcasters and singers, not governments. The Israeli Foreign Ministry did not respond to detailed requests to comment. A spokesman for Mr. Netanyahu's office said that he would review the questions and consider responding. He did not respond. Eurovision's director, Martin Green, said in an interview that Israel's actions last year were excessive, but did not contribute to Israel's unexpected second-place finish. A Times investigation based on previously undisclosed voting data, Eurovision documents and interviews with more than 50 people, however, found that the campaign could have easily changed the contest outcome. Israel's singer won the popular votes in countries where polls show that Israel is deeply unpopular. A vote analysis shows that in some countries it would have only taken a few hundred people to tip the popular vote, which in turn can shape the final outcome because of the contest voting system. There's no evidence that Israel, as some Eurovision fans speculated, used bots or other covert tactics to manipulate the vote. Organizers have kept full vote data a closely guarded secret, even from their own broadcasters. Faced with an internal revolt and threats from Israeli allies to leave the contest, they publicly downplayed Israel's vote campaign and never thoroughly investigated it. Contest organizers commissioned a review of broadcasters' feelings on Israel, but kept the full report secret. They called a vote on keeping Israel in the contest, then abruptly canceled it. They discouraged broadcasters from talking to journalists. The Israeli government has co-opted Eurovision, said Stefan John Hofstein, the chairman of the board of Iceland's public broadcaster. buying advertisements and coordinating social media messaging is not illegal. Eurovision is, after all, just a singing contest, albeit the world's largest. But while governments often try to capitalize on the publicity their singers provide, no government-led promotional efforts has been as extensive and controversial as Israel's. Israel's voice should be heard everywhere, said Israel's largely ceremonial president, Isaac Herzog, who raised the boycott issue in meetings with world leaders last year. We should participate, we should raise our flag high, and we should bring the best performers to Eurovision. Eurovision, which once launched the international careers of ABBA and Celine Dion, faces an uncertain future. Financial projections reviewed by the Times estimated that last year that the boycotts would cost the nonprofit broadcasting group hundreds of thousands of dollars in participation fees. Mr. Green said Eurovision's finances were robust, but acknowledged struggling to find sponsors. It's certainly one of the biggest challenges that we faced, Mr. Green said of the Israel controversy. But Eurovision, he added, exists to demonstrate global harmony, to show the world as it could be. This is the inside story of the controversy that almost broke Eurovision. In May of 2024, fans gathered in the coastal Swedish city of Malmö for the first Eurovision contest of the Gaza War. Despite the name, Eurovision brings together singers and broadcasters from around the world. Israel debuted in 1973. Musicians compete under national flags, but the acts are funded by broadcasters. At the time, no bright line rule prohibited government promotion, but independence is a core Eurovision tenet. The Israeli government, though, had quietly been promoting its broadcasters' acts since at least 2018. According to Doron Medeli, a former Eurovision songwriter for Israel, the government spent more than $100,000 on social media promotion that year, he said. Israel won. Mr. Medeli said that the victory convinced Israeli leaders that Eurovision, which is hugely popular in Israel, was a good investment. The Netanyahu government increased spending ahead of the Malmö contest, records show. European public opinion opposed the war, and some music industry groups were already calling for Israel to be kicked out of Eurovision. A strong Israeli performance would show that Israel was loved by the European public, according to Israeli officials. They, along with some people close to Eurovision, spoke on condition of anonymity, either because they were not authorized to speak publicly or because that they feared retribution from contest organizers. In Malmö, the Israeli government spent more than $800,000 in Eurovision-related advertising, according to data from the Israeli Government Advertising Agency. The data, which is obtained by the Israeli media watchdog, the Seventh Eye, and provided to the Times, reveals that the bulk of the money came from the foreign ministry. A line item from the Prime Minister's Hasbara office showed that it had also allocated money for vote promotion. Israel's public broadcaster, Kan, told the Times that it had no prior knowledge of government ad campaigns and that to its knowledge, the competition rules weren't violated. In 2024, Israel's singer Eden Golan came second in the popular vote and topped the voting in many nations where pro-Palestinian sentiment is strong. The world, it seems, is not against us, the Israeli news site Ynet wrote. Ynet noted that the Foreign Office had advertised on YouTube during Eurovision, but the story and the unusual voting patterns otherwise received little attention. Eurovision broadcasters were preoccupied. The activist Greta Thunberg and thousands of others crowded Malmö, protesting Israel's involvement. On stage, several singers wore Palestinian symbols. The Dutch rapper Joost Klein was expelled for an unrelated altercation with a camera woman. But one broadcaster from Slovenia noted the peculiar vote outcome and asked Eurovision to release more data. Organizers never responded, the broadcaster said. Eurovision said last week that it had not deemed any Israeli promotions from 2024 to be excessive. Eurovision had put Malmo behind it, but its problems were only beginning. At the 2025 Eurovision contest in Basel, Switzerland, Israel finished second overall and won the popular vote, once again carrying countries where people have been outspoken against Israel's policies. This time, the unexpected results were noticed. Using Google's ad library, journalists at the Finnish broadcaster Yle revealed that the Israeli government had bought online advertisements in multiple languages calling on people to vote for the Israeli contestant Yuval Raphael up to the maximum 20 times. Spending figures for that contest are not available, but Israel's campaign was broader and more coordinated than in Malmo. Mr. Netanyahu himself posted a graphic to social media encouraging people to vote 20 times for Ms. Raphael. Pro-Israel groups across Europe posted the same and related graphics. Israel's deputy ambassador to Austria, Hillel Levi-Judkowski, told the Times that he had contacted the diaspora group to rally support for Ms. Raphael. Mr. Medali, the Israeli songwriter, defended the strategy. Israel spent so much on security, he said that it was only fair that the government fund promotion. Everybody is jealous and triggered because Israel is achieving great results, he said. Israel's promotion efforts could have easily affected the popular vote. An analysis of vote data found that's because in some countries records show so few people vote that only several hundred voting repeatedly could actually change the outcome. After the contest, Slovenia's broadcaster again demanded voting data and threatened to withdraw. Others privately called for an outside investigation. Mr. Green, the director, promised that Eurovision's governing body would review the vote, but that group never received a full vote analysis, just top-line data, Mr. Green acknowledged. Neither he nor the Broadcasting Union commissioned an external investigation. We are very, very happy that the result is true and fair and analyzed, Mr. Green said. In July, at a broadcaster meeting in London, dissent mounted. Spain called for a debate over Israel's participation and for changing a voting system that it saw as susceptible to manipulation. Rather than investigate, Eurovision hired a consultant, the Czech broadcasting veteran Peter Dvorak, to interview members about Israel's participation. Opinions varied widely. Sometimes they just felt that Israel as a state is sometimes using this event as some sort of promotional tool, Mr. Dvorak recalled in an interview. Others wanted Eurovision to skip or postpone the 2026 contest. Some felt that Khan, the Israeli broadcaster, should not be held accountable for the actions of its government. Broadcasters would later receive only a summary of Mr. Dvorak's findings, not his report, reinforcing some views that the effort was a waste of time. By the end of September, 5 broadcasters, Iceland, Ireland, the Netherlands, Spain, and Slovenia, were openly discussing a boycott. A Eurovision meeting in Croatia that month did not allay concerns. Instead, Mr. Green's team gave 2 seemingly contradictory presentations, according to 2 attendees. The first presentation claimed that Israel had not affected the 2025 outcome. No detailed data was offered. The second presentation coached broadcasters on using social media to secure more votes. To some in the room, organizers seemed to be saying that online campaigns could influence the vote, but that Israel's had not. Organizers were stuck between competing factions. Rumors swirled that Norway and Portugal might join the dissenting 5 countries if Israel remained on stage. Documents showed that Israeli allies like Germany and Estonia opposed the ban. Organizers calculated the financial effects of both scenarios, losing Israel's critics or losing Israel and its defenders. Neither outcome was good, records show, and by some estimates, Eurovision stood to lose more than $600,000 in fees. Things had gotten so bad that even Austria's national broadcasting chief floated in one internal conversation the possibility of his country withdrawing in support of Israel. According to someone directly familiar with the discussion, that would have left the 2026 contest set to take place in Vienna without a host. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A spokesman for the Austrian broadcaster said it has always been clear that Vienna would host. The broadcasting chief has since resigned. In a late September letter to members, Eurovision acknowledged that it had never faced a divisive situation like this before and announced an emergency vote on Israel's participation. Privately, Eurovision's lawyers delivered an extraordinary piece of advice. Organizers could legally exclude Israel if they wanted to. A few weeks later, Eurovision canceled the emergency vote, citing the new ceasefire in Gaza. It pushed the issue into December. Broadcasters still had questions about human rights in Israel's marketing campaign, but Eurovision seemingly wanted the controversy to go away. Its communications team had circulated an email discouraging broadcasters from speaking with journalists. The delay gave Israel's government time to make a diplomatic push. Israeli embassies contacted broadcasters at least 3 countries, according to documents and interviews with people involved. In a 4th country, the Israeli government contacted the foreign ministry to discuss Eurovision. Finally, in December, after months of debate and delay, broadcasters gathered in Geneva to address Israel's participation. Once again, Eurovision sidestepped the question. The Broadcasting Union arranged a vote on whether to limit each viewer to 10 votes and discourage disproportionate promotion campaigns. There was a twist. If members approved the changes, they would be agreeing to keep Israel in Eurovision without ever explicitly voting on the question. Some members had told Mr. Borah that they did not want to be held accountable in their home countries for such a vote. The Broadcasting Union's president, Delphine Aronot-Kunzi, acknowledged that the arrangement might appear to be rather bizarre, but she explained not voting was the most democratic solution possible, according to meeting minutes. Frederick Delaplace of the Belgian broadcaster VRT was unconvinced. Eurovision, he said in the meeting, was hiding behind guidelines rather than discussing human rights. By second ballot, the broadcasters approved the rule changes. Israel would remain in Eurovision without anyone having to vote on the matter. The dissenting 5 broadcasters quickly boycotted. Mr. Green said the new rules addressed a perception issue, not actual problems. At this year's Eurovision in Vienna, other countries are testing the new rules, mobilizing the diasporas to vote. An Israeli advertisement is once again generating controversy. A team behind Israel's entrant, Noam Batan, circulated social media promotions calling for people to vote for him 10 times. Eurovision organizers, racing to avoid a repeat of last year, formally warned the broadcaster and asked what the posts be removed. Employing a direct call to action to vote 10 times for one artist or song is also not in line with our rules, nor the spirit of the competition, Mr. Green said. He again reassured the public that such campaigns cannot affect the outcome. Meta's embrace of AI is making its employees miserable. As it adapts to the artificial intelligence era, the company is pushing many of its 78,000 workers to use the technology and preparing to lay some of them off. In an internal post last month, Meta told its U.S. employees that it was making a change that would affect tens of thousands of them. What employees typed into their computer, how they moved their mouse, where they clicked, and what they saw on their screen would be tracked, Meta said. The goal, the company said, was to capture employee data so Meta's artificial intelligence models could learn how people actually complete everyday tasks using computers. Many workers immediately revolted. In online comments, they blasted the tracking as a privacy violation, calling it antisocial and callous. "This makes me super uncomfortable," an engineering manager wrote in a comment in response to the announcement, which was reviewed by the New York Times. How do we opt out? There is no option to opt out on your corporate laptop, replied Andrew Bosworth, Meta's chief technology officer. Employees reacted by posting more than 100 angry and surprised emojis, according to the messages. Mark Zuckerberg, Meta's chief executive, has staked the future of his company on AI by weaving the powerful technology into apps like Facebook and Instagram, and spending hundreds of billions of dollars on developing AI models and data centers. But as the Silicon Valley company tries to transition from an internet firm to an AI organization, its embrace of the technology has been awkward and at times downright ugly. Meta is pushing its 78,000 employees to adopt AI tools and factoring their use of the technology in performance reviews. The company is also tracking employees' computer work to feed and train its AI models, and it's cutting jobs to offset its AI spending, saying last month that it would slash 10% of its workforce. That has led to anger and anxiety as employees await news of whether they are affected by the layoffs, which are slated to be carried out on May 20th, according to 11 current and former Meta employees. Some said that they no longer saw Meta as a place for a long career. Others were looking for new jobs or trying to signal that they wanted to be laid off so they could receive severance pay. The current and former employees said, "It's incredibly demoralizing," an employee who does user research wrote in an internal post, which was reviewed by the Times. The angst at Meta offers a preview of what may happen in other tech companies as they increasingly incorporate AI into their workplaces. Microsoft, Block, and Coinbase have recently announced layoffs or buyouts as AI has reshaped their work. The technology has been particularly disruptive at tech firms because AI tools are useful at generating code, which was typically written by the software engineers who underpin many digital businesses. AI can potentially make everyone a better coder and help them do way more things than fewer resources. But as a result, it also brings more intensity to the daily life of the worker, said Leo Bossuet, a professor of information systems at the University of Washington. There is no playbook for AI in the workplace yet. In a statement, Tracy Clayton, the Meta spokesperson, said that the purpose of the new employee tracking program was to train the company's AI products. There are safeguards in place to protect sensitive content, and the data is not used for any other purpose, he said. Reuters and The Information earlier reported some details of Meta's internal AI push. Meta began reorientating itself around AI not long after OpenAI replaced the ChatGPT chatbot in 2022. Last summer, Mr. Zuckerberg spent billions to create a lab for superintelligence, a futuristic form of AI that can act as the ultimate personal assistant, and overhauled its AI division. Mr. Zuckerberg, who's 41, has spoken at length about how superintelligence will improve people's lives. In March, Meta organized AI Transformation Weeks for its workers, 5 current and former employees said, and the aim was to teach employees how to use AI coding tools and AI agents, which are digital assistants that can do tasks by themselves. Product designers who style the way products look and how people interact with products were told to use AI to try coding, and software coders were told to use AI to try designing products. Meta also introduced internal dashboards to track employees' consumption of tokens, a unit of AI use that is roughly equivalent to 4 characters of text, 4 people said. Some said that the dashboards were a pressure tactic to encourage competition with colleagues. That led some employees to make so many AI agents that others had to introduce agents to find agents and agents to rate agents, 2 people said. On April 17th, Reuters reported that Meta would soon lay off 10% of employees. Workers fretted over whether they had been training their AI replacements. 3 people said. After Meta said late last month that it would start tracking employees' computer use, hundreds of workers spoke up. Your callousness to the concerns of your own employees is concerning, one employee told Mr. Bosworth in an internal post. And in another post that day, employees questioned whether Meta could safely secure the data that it collected from workers while using that information to train AI models. This data is very tightly controlled, Mr. Bosworth replied. This will not be a leak risk. 2 days later, Meta announced that it will lay off about 8,000 people this month. The cuts will allow the company to offset the other investments that we're making, Janelle Gale, Meta's head of human resources, said in an internal message. She added, I know this leaves everyone with nearly a month of ambiguity, which is incredibly unsettling. Some employees have since shared layoff guides and nihilistic memes. It do not matter, read one meme shared internally. Employees have created at least 3 websites counting down to the May 20 layoffs, with one website's header reading, Big Beautiful Layoff, a play on the 2025 domestic policy law that President Trump called the One Big Beautiful Bill. Meta has hinted at more changes. We don't really know what the optimal size of the company will be in the future, Susan Lee, the chief financial officer, said during a call with investors last week. I think that there's a lot of change right now with AI capabilities advancing rapidly. The day after the investment call, Mr. Zuckerberg held a company-wide question and answer meeting along with other executives. During the meeting, a recording of which the Times reviewed, Mr. Zuckerberg said that Meta was not gathering data on employees for surveillance or performance tracking or anything like that. Instead, the data would train AI on how smart people use computers to accomplish tasks, he said. I think we know that AI is one of the most competitive fields probably in history, Mr. Zuckerberg added. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 12th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Jeff Shapiro. Thank you for listening.